Hey everybody, welcome to another IAIB Spotlight for the IAIB Network. I'm Andrew Zarian. I'm joined by this week an IAIB member, radio veteran, and an expert, in my opinion, and in many people's opinions. He said he's very opinionated, and we like that here on the show. Mike Phillips, everybody. Mike Phillips is here with us. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing great, Andrew. Thanks.
I appreciate you coming here. We've become friends over the last couple of months online, and we've spoken about radio, and you are from terrestrial radio, traditional media, and I would love to know your story, hear your story. Many of our viewers would love to know how you got into this, how you ended up going into internet broadcasting, and where you feel that it's going. So we're going to go through all of that today, Mike.
Great.
Let's start off with how you got started in the radio business. What year, how you went into it, what made you go into radio? Because radio that I know is definitely different than the radio that you knew getting into it.
Well, that's got to be true because, honest to God, the way I, quote, got into radio is my father built a radio station in 1961, signed on the air on January 2nd, 1962. How far do I go back? Is it in my blood? My mother and I actually drove the tractor to bury the ground radials for the AM tower. So that's how far back it goes. But what was interesting is that once the radio station was on the air, and of course things were very, very different than they are now, but my parents thought it would be cute if one of their kids had a show on the radio station. So I started on the radio in 1962.
So was your father a radio personality, or he owned the station? He built the station?
Oh, heck no. He, again, things are very different. This wouldn't happen this way. And this is, I think it's a fascinating story. But my father was actually, he was in the Postal Service until 1951, in which time he decided he wanted to go into business for himself. He's kind of like me. He doesn't really play well with others. He's passed away now, but he kind of an independent sort. So he had always wanted to be into technology, so he became a TV repairman. He was the best one in the county by far, far and away. So time goes on. He loves technology. He decides he wants to, I'm skipping one step. He was actually advertising his TV repair business on the local radio station. Okay. There was only one local radio station in our small town. He was advertising a Sunday hymn show. He went over there and because he was sponsoring the entire show. Mm-hmm. But immediately after the show, at 1 o'clock when it was over, they would play a commercial for his primary competitor. He went over there and said, I don't know much about the radio business, but it doesn't seem really fair to me that after I spend an entire hour sponsoring a show, you immediately send people to my competitor. And they said, well, that's just too bad. Well, take it or leave it. And he said, well, that's not a good answer. What should I do about it? The guy looked at him. He said, take your business elsewhere. He said, how am I going to do that? There's not another radio station in town. The guy said, build one.
and he went and actually did.
And those guys sold out from losing money.
That's hysterical. So, I mean, you literally, your father built the station, and that's how you started getting involved in radio.
By hand, he built it. He didn't lay the block for the building, but that's about all he didn't do. He did all the wiring. He did everything. Now, that's not quite true. We had a broadcast engineer who was the first employee, a guy who's thankfully still around and still we're in contact with. Lives about 2 hours from here. And so he knew the part that my father didn't know, but they literally put it on the air, and it was very successful, very, very successful.
So did you immediately pick up an interest for radio, or when you were a kid at this point and you started going on the radio, were you interested in it, or was it something that you were doing because, your parents were involved and they put you inside of it?
Yeah, I have two brothers, and I'm the only one who was really interested in it. And I got to tell you, I loved it. I loved every bit of it. This was the age whenever Elvis Presley was the big stuff, and so the rock. One other part of the story was interesting. My father, in those days, it wasn't big band music, but what they called it was MOR, middle of the road stuff. Frank Sinatra, the classics. That's what he wanted to play on the radio station because that's the music he liked. But as it turns out, and this is the honest to gosh truth, as it turns out, the day that the station signed on the air, he was out of town. So my mother and our DJ, our first employee, decided that was dumb that we should be doing rock and roll. So when he got
Hmm.
back to town, he heard them playing top 40 rock and roll music, and so he just left it.
Yeah.
so so I mean, here I am, I'm a kid, and the music's what's happening, and I get into it. Of course I'm going to get dead into
Yeah.
it. I mean, I absolutely loved it,
I mean,
and I grew up in it.
and it's something that you realize at an early age. I know a lot of people in the radio business now, and you know, growing up, 4 or 5 of my friends have got into the radio business. But I remember when they were younger, they never really listened to the radio. They got into it because they were started as a producer or something else, and they kind of fell into radio. But I remember when I was a kid, there was a Sunday night kids talk show. I think it was like Talk Kids NY or something. And I would call into the radio show all the time. I mean, constantly I was calling into that show. And I was probably like 7, 8 years old. So it's something that you really realize at a young age. When I got into this, doing what we're doing now, it wasn't really my career path. I was doing, IT work, and I kind of fell into this because of a hobby. And then I realized, I've always loved radio. Why not continue it? So it's interesting to see, the different ways people get involved inside of this business. So now you're young, you're doing this as a kid. When does it become a career? When does it become a job?
Well, I think it probably was from then, because when it's a family business,
You're
when people
working.
don't show up for work, guess who gets to go do it? Whenever you're short on employees, guess who gets to go do it? Of course, I was in school, so that made it weekends and afternoons and so forth. But I was involved. I mean, from day one, believe it or not. Again, this is small market radio. This is not WABC, WNBC, WCBS. It's nothing like that, although they were very different in those days too. So I actually grew up in it. I became certainly more actively involved once I got my driver's license. I mean, back in those days, you actually had to have a third class radio
Yeah.
operator's license to be able to operate the transmitter.
Yeah,
And
you need a license. Up until I think even the 80s, you needed a license to operate, right? To
well,
to be on the radio.
strangely enough, a funny thing happened that I think at the time you had to be 16 and I was 10 or 11. And so we had a problem. I could not be on the radio without this license. So I wrote dumb as I am, I wrote the FCC. Get this. I wrote the FCC a letter, and I said, look, here's what I'm doing. It's a family business. Would you make an exception? They wrote back and said, okay. So I was probably the youngest person in the United States at the time to ever have a third class radio operator's license.
Now, is this something that you have to renew, or once
No,
you get it, you get it?
they did away with it.
Yeah, at the time. I mean, now you
Yeah,
don't
I
need it,
think you
but
had. I don't. That's a long time ago. They did away with it. I mean, I became a. Obviously, as I got more technically involved, I got the engineer's license, the first class radio license, which then was converted to a general radio license. Which you may have had to renew them. If you did, it was only a fee. There was no subsequent testing or anything like that. So.
so at a young age, you're doing this. You're a teenager, you're getting more involved. Small market radio now, even it's bigger compared to what it was when you were doing it, when you got involved in it.
Well,
You're talking small markets,
let's
but small markets now, I mean, there's a lot of money in small markets.
Well, it's interesting because looking at radio now for people, and of course, almost everyone's younger than I am, but but looking back, remember that talk radio really did not become a factor in the radio business until the late '80s. Love
Yeah.
him, hate him, Rush Limbaugh is the one who pioneered talk radio at a national level. You had before that, Larry King was doing a national radio talk show that I mean, you'd have to hold your nose to listen to it. I mean, it was
Yeah.
just garbage.
Well,
But
yeah,
for the,
he was one of the first ones to really get syndicated. I knew Don Imus was another guy that was one of the first guys to get syndicated like that.
yeah.
Uh,
So I mean, but back then, I mean, I was thinking, funny enough that this just popped in my head, but I was thinking that back in the '70s we had some local issue. The government required you to do public service programs and things to show that you're serving the community, and you should be able to maintain your station license and so forth. And I actually found a tape of a program we did that was an hour-long talk program, a roundtable type discussion that we did and aired in '72, and it created just a real storm. People really were fascinated at listening to that program, which to this day and time you listen to it and you'd laugh like crazy. But that's a cue that we missed. We should have realized at that moment that there was a pretty good market for talk. But
yeah.
remember, with Talk 40 radio, there are two things that you did not do a lot of. One was dead air, and the other was talk. You were supposed to play music. So We kind of missed the cue on that
Well,
one.
we were talking about syndication. This is interesting, and I've heard both arguments. Do you think syndication hurt radio more than it helped it? What do you think of syndication? Because you ended up, in my opinion, I think it hurt a lot of these small town talk radio guys. When a Don Imus or a Rush Limbaugh or a Hannity, the list goes on, starts getting syndicated in nearly every single market. It does take away from that talent pool that you have in that market.
That's a complex question, and I don't necessarily agree, because one of the reasons, and it depends on what you mean by syndication. If you mean simply the availability of Sean Hannity or of the Al Sharpton show, if that's still on the air, if just the mere availability of these shows, I don't think is a bad thing. I don't think also, if you look at, for example, the AM radio market, I don't think the availability of syndication caused the collapse of the AM market. What caused the collapse is FM.
FM, yeah.
And the fact that people were moving to the FM dial. The question is, how do you keep people on the AM dial?
And how did they? I mean, were they able to?
Well, I mean, that's the old discussion that content is king. If you have what people want to see and hear, they're going to get to you, even if it's on AM.
Yeah. I remember, FM really took off when I was younger. I mean, when I was a kid, it was all about FM. Everybody wanted to be on an FM station, but talk predominantly was on AM. And it stayed on AM. It's still on AM.
People, like in my market, the major talk station is an FM talker.
So it's all depending on the market you're in.
Absolutely. And it just, it's whatever station. Now, here's the rest of the question I was going to answer about syndication. If in syndication, if you are looking at the radio industry, how it is consolidated in terms of a few companies owning all the radio stations, it has destroyed the industry, because it has turned into a bean counter numbers game instead of being a community-oriented programming service that people want to listen to.
Yeah, you're right. I absolutely. You could count on one hand how many companies now own every station. There's Citadel and Emerson and Clear Channel and Viacom, really, and maybe a couple other ones.
And they're looking at it dollars and cents. They've gone out and spent big money trying to buy up all the radio stations. They've got all this debt service. They've got to pay the bills. What their biggest expense is typically is personnel, so they cut it. Right now, I have no clue. I have no way. Kirk Harnack may know, but I have no way of knowing what the real numbers are. But I venture a guess that most of the radio stations where you are IBM computers.
Well, yeah, 99% of them. Everything is automated. You might have one guy that does, a morning show, but that's about it. Everything else is automated. They went to this Jack FM format for almost every station now.
Well, the other thing, though, is what's called voice tracking. And that is that the voice can go into the studio and can do 4 hours worth of programming in about 20 minutes. All he does is read the voice into the computer.
Yeah.
He knows what the song is going to be. Ladies and gentlemen, here are the mamas and the papas. And he's done with that, and he says, okay, that was the mamas and the papas. Coming up next, we've got Hey Jude by the Beatles. So all he has to do is the voice drop in, puts it into the computer, and then he leaves and goes and does something else.
Yeah.
And he's done a 4-hour air shift in 20 minutes.
In 20 minutes, yeah.
Voice tracking.
Yeah.
All right, that's killed the business, but there's one other aspect to that as well. This guy doesn't have to be in that radio station. He can work for a conglomerate radio chain, and he can do 20 radio stations sitting in his office in Omaha.
Via ISDN. That's pretty much how all these guys are doing it. Russia's not going to a
lot of them now are connected through some pretty serious internet connections, T1 lines and things like that. They have some pretty sophisticated connectivity, but however they do it, they can do voice tracking, and I'm not exactly sure how they're doing it the best way, but they can even transfer this stuff with FTP, and as long as the file is on the server, it can serve from there.
It's amazing how it's totally changed. So let's go into the transition of this. Radio was king for so many years, and I'm one of the few. Probably there's one generation after me. Maybe my brothers are like the only ones that really listen to radio at all. But kids are not listening to radio. When did that turn start happening, and why do you think it started happening? Why do you? In your opinion, because you're from that industry, you're from that business, where did it start going wrong?
Well, did it go wrong? and you and I were talking previously about viewership and things like that. And in video, it's called eyeballs, and that is you have competition for the eyeballs. So in radio, you have competition for the ears. And what that means is that if a radio station, Sean Hannity show, he's not just competing with other people doing talk at the same time. He's competing with iPods, competing with internet broadcasting. He's competing with everything that's entertainment based. We've talked a lot about internet broadcasting in general, which we'll get into, but is it really going to be successful? Well, who knows where it's going to end up? But the reality is that for every person who's watching the Andrew Zarian show, they're not watching something on NBC, CBS, or one of the networks. So it's competition. How great the competition is going to be, time will
Yeah,
tell.
see, this is the argument. Was it competition that hurt radio, or was it the fact that it was bad decision making on party? I think it's a combination of both. I think it's a combination of both. And this is my opinion, Mike, and you tell me if I'm wrong. And I always said when satellite radio came, a lot of people in radio thought, well, this is my exit. I could go here. I may not make as much money, but I can make a name for myself here. And the automation of radio and the fact that there's no personality on is not really giving any unique edge over the other stations. So they're all playing top 40. Everything's automated. There's no morning guy. There's no afternoon guy. It's just music spinning constantly. And you may have one guy, like a Ryan Seacrest that's syndicated on nearly every market that he does a morning show. But there's no personality connected to the music. So why am I going to listen to this station when I could get the same content on my iPod?
Well, and that's the point I was going to make earlier, in that I watched this transition. And again, I'm really old, so
you're not old, Mike. Come
my
on.
perspective goes back a lot further than a lot of people. But I think the first, and I'm going to particularly refer to music radio, because for a long, long time, top 40, as we called it, was king. That's what it was. Everything else was secondary. So I think the first thing that started impacting radio listenership was the cassette tape. Now, I'll back up further than that. The 8-track tape. But not the 8-track as much as the cassette tape, because the cassette tape was the first medium that allowed a person to make his or her own tapes and play them in the car. There were people with 8-track recorders, but they were not nearly as prevalent as there are people who had cassette tape recorders. So I think the cassette tape was the first real problem for radio. Even when all that happened, then what stations would start playing 20 records over and over and over again. So you couldn't listen for a long time, even if you liked those 20. Then stations started playing oldies, the oldies station. So they wanted to have all these consultants come in and tell them, what should we do to get the biggest audience? And what they did was they said, you need to play the Sacred 600, as they called it. What's the Sacred 600? That's 600 of the best oldies of all time that have been tested by consultants. And what you do is you play them, and once you're done playing them, you play them again. Yeah. Well, the Sacred 600 then became 500, then 400, then 300. And it got to the point that you had to be a glutton for punishment to be able to listen to a radio station for more than an hour. You could turn on the radio and hear a song for 3 days in a row that you've already heard
exactly at the time that you turned it on last time. Yeah, exactly.
Well, why would you do that instead of throwing in those days in a cassette tape? And now the real answer to the question is, I think the first major problem for radio was the iPod.
What was that a problem that they were aware of? I mean, when it happened, do you, from what you know or your opinion, when the iPod came out, did they see it as a threat, or did they see it as, well, we have, so-and-so in the mornings who's going to listen to the music?
I don't mean to be unkind here, but since I was in the business, I'll take the blame myself. I'm being very, very delicate here. Lots of people in the radio business are not really smart. Just like I said, when we overlooked that talk thing we did back in the 70s, a lot of people programming radio stations, a lot of owners, a lot of bean counters, they're not very good at reading the tea leaves.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you don't believe what I'm saying, go to the industry communications medium. It's called radio-info.com. And read just over and over and over again. This station did this. They're going to flip this format. They're going to do that. Why are they doing it? They don't have but so much Spanish population. Why are they going Spanish? Oh, because this failed, that failed. they really don't know what they're doing. And
Yeah.
part of the problem is there's just too much fragmentation. There are just too many radio stations out there right now. You have too many stations competing for too much of the pie.
For people just tuning in, we're joined by Mike Phillips. MikePhillips.me is his website. He also does a Sunday morning computer program, Computer 2K Now.
Computers
2K Now. I wrote Computers 2K Now. Computers 2K Now. Also, you can follow him on Twitter at MC Phillips. In my opinion, he's one of the most knowledgeable people that I know about radio and the history of radio and microphones. We all know audio is not important at all, right, Mike?
Nah, it's just an
It's overrated. You know what's funny? And let's go into this transition. I want to talk to you about radio personalities that have made the plunge into internet broadcasting. You're seeing it happen more and more. I was discussing this with you yesterday. We were talking about when you took the plunge into internet broadcasting. When was your first internet broadcast? When did you try doing it?
That's interesting because before I answer the question, remember that or know that I got out of the radio business in the mid 80s. We sold our radio station because I went on to other things in life, particularly things that you could make a living doing, because the radio business is really, really tough to make money. I don't care what people tell you. They're not a license to print money.
Yeah. Well, there's a select few that, that they're able to make the money, and then everybody else is just getting bottom of the barrel
it's like
stuff.
the Andrew Zarians of the world. There are very few people that are doing extremely well in internet broadcasting yet. It's still early. It's in its infancy, but that's an exciting place to be at this point in time. So for a long time, I was totally out of the broadcasting aspect of radio or anything. But then it turns out that Amnon Nissan, who his show is the computers2know.com show, Amnon started doing a computer help show on a local radio station back in 1993. And in those days that people had computers, they had no clue what to do with them. I mean, those were the days of whenever you had to go find a driver and install it in Windows 3.1, and you still had to drop down into DOS to do things to make your computer work. I mean, it's just silly what you had to do then versus what you can do now. So that being said, they would burn up his phone lines with calls. It was a very successful show, had lots of advertisers. It was for, I think, 2 hours. Well, times change, and I'd say about 2 years ago, I guess the first thing that happened was his co-host Spencer he had heard about Ustream. He said, why don't we put a webcam in the studio, and why don't we simulcast on Ustream? And so I had been on the show, I don't know, 5 or 10 times over the years, because when Spencer couldn't show up or whenever he was going to be there by himself and he's desperate, he would call me, wanted to know if I wanted to come over, because I do know quite a bit about computers too. So I would go over and do that. So they started doing the Ustream thing, and they never could get it to work. They would go on, there would be no audio. This would freeze, that would freeze. So finally they said, we're having audio problems. I said, you want me to come over there? I said, yep. So I grabbed my little bag of tricks and I went over to the studio, got there about half an hour before airtime, and I took out my little bag of tricks, plugged it all in, and it worked perfectly. Now, let me ask you, what do you think the trick was in that bag of tricks, Andrew?
Your bag of tricks.
Yeah.
Let's see.
This is not a trick question. You should be able to answer this one.
So, I don't know. You have a lot of tricks.
What was the problem that was keeping their audio from broadcasting?
What was that? I don't know.
Ground loop isolator.
Really?
They had a ground loop. The station's grounds between its internet and its studio grounds were causing this computer not to be able to work. I took a little Radio Shack ground loop isolator, plugged it in, and it worked perfectly. Never had a problem after that.
So what was it doing exactly? It just wouldn't let. It was buzzing around.
Oh, it was. You couldn't even hear the audio. I mean, ground loops can take on all sorts of characters. And then this one, it was an extreme situation. I mean, it was really bad grounding. I mean, even to the point of they probably should have called an electrician into the studio to check their grounds to make sure that they didn't have things crossed up. But I've never seen one that bad, by the way, since then. But once I isolated it, well, it just was crystal clear and perfect.
That's amazing.
So anyway, after that went on, I guess, for about 6-8 months, and there were all sorts of other problems along the way with computers crashing and what have you. But anyway, then what happened was the station. This was from I think 9 to 11 on Sunday. Then the station moved him back from 8 to 10. Then the station decided, well, we're going to cut you back to an hour.
So
So it was
let me
8
ask you
until
this:
9.
when they started, I guess, syndicated their broadcasts on UStream, did the station have an issue with that?
No.
Because I know endless stories from people in the radio business that have asked to do that, and the station has said, no, you can't do that.
Well, if it's a music thing, I can understand them not agreeing to that. But if it's a talk thing, I don't know why they would care. In retrospect, I'm not sure they even knew. But Amnon was doing the show for nothing. I mean, he was not getting
Yeah.
paid to do it. He did it. It was a labor of love. So it's what are they going to do? And it was good for the station because it got the additional online publicity. And again, this is 2-3 years ago. I mean, internet broadcasting is moving very, very quickly. This was not nearly the big
Yeah.
deal that it is now. So what happened though is when they moved him from 8 until 9, he said, "Well, this is not long enough." So he then decided to do the second hour from his studio, which he built a studio in a room adjacent to his home. He built a broadcasting studio there, and so started doing the show from 10 until 11. So it was 8 to 9 on the radio and on the internet, and then 8 to 9, 9 to 10, 10 to 11 his studio. Well, 6 months later, the station said, we're going to cancel the show altogether.
Yeah.
So we moved it from 9 until, and the show typically runs from 9 to 12:30 or 1 o'clock. And one day it was going so hot and heavy, it went until 3 o'clock. So what? There's no time limits.
There's no
There are
time
no
limit.
constraints.
Yeah. What mistakes do you think internet broadcasters do when they make the plunge into traditional broadcasters make when they make the plunge into internet broadcasting? Because you're seeing a lot of this happen now over the last couple of
Well,
years. Since 2007, more and more of these guys are just coming exclusively online, and they're making a lot of mistakes. It's a totally different business, in my opinion. The way that you market yourself, the way that you're doing ads, the way that your equipment is set up, it's not the same.
yeah, and my opinion on that's probably not too popular, but because I'm going to generalize, and when you generalize, many times what you say is not true. It is just that, a generalization. A lot of guys go into the internet because their radio gig has fallen apart.
Yeah,
They've
no,
lost their job because of consolidation.
lost their
They've got
job,
a
lost
hundred.
pay.
Say again.
Lost their job, they're not making as much money as they were. I mean, a lot of things has happened in radio over the last couple of years.
So the one thing that I preach, and this is, I guess I don't know how accurate it is, but to me, the reason you go on a radio station, whether it's AM, whether it's FM, whether it's LPFM, whether it's TV, what you're after is bandwidth. It's just the ability to get media out. And so the radio is bandwidth. Well, the internet is bandwidth. It has come of age. I mean, we're doing HD video streaming with high quality stereo audio. I mean, it is now, in terms of its technical ability, has dwarfed radio. Radio cannot compete with the internet in terms of fidelity
Yeah,
at
right.
this point in time.
Yeah.
So that battle is over. The benefit that, and the reason that people are having trouble making the transition, is that the real benefit for radio is when you go get in your car, you're going to mash one of about 10 buttons, and boom, there you are listening to something. You probably have developed a favorite radio station. That radio station is on the air 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you get into the car, when you mash the seventh button, you're going to get, what's there, and it's probably something you already like. So there's this built-in relationship. When you want to listen to something on the internet, you have to know what the website is. You have to know what time they're going to air the show. You have
Yeah.
to. There may be a larger variety of shows on the internet than the radio station might have. So you might tune in at one point to hear them talking about how to podcast, which may have no interest, and at another time of the day they might be talking about gardening, which is something that's your passion.
Sure.
So there's just not the same one-on-one connection between the internet channels and the radio stations that are there now, but I think that's changing. And
In what way? And that's one thing that we've always discussed, and many internet broadcasters would agree. There has to be a simpler way for someone to find your content. There needs to be more of an organized way, and that is the advantage that traditional radio has. It's the fact that you know what you're getting when you hit channel 1.
they're two game changers. They're in my mind, two things have to happen for there to be the real game changer, and they're both happening. The first is that there has to be readily available, reliable, dependable, unlimited bandwidth in the car, right?
Yeah.
So if people have their iPhones and they're fighting 2 gig limits, how much time are they going to be spending watching GFQ Live and HQ on their iPhone
Yeah.
and burning up all their bandwidth? That's a limitation. The second limitation is, and I just say it's the one button rule. And once they can press one button and you're there, the game has changed.
No, you're absolutely
Now,
right, and already we're starting to see a difference. Ford, for example, has with their Ford My Touch, or I think it's Ford Sync. I forgot they changed the name. You could literally get a Wi-Fi, not a Wi-Fi, but a mobile hotspot, USB plug for 4G. Pop it into the car, and now your car is connected, and you have internet radio right there. There's services like Stitcher Radio, Livio, TuneIn. There's a bunch of these now that are. It's like a station. You turn the dial, you find the station, but there's so much to pick from. How do you know what's good and what's not? In my opinion, in order for this to be successful, they have to start looking at it as a station. So if you're Stitcher Radio, you want people to listen to your platform. What I would do is create stations and have set times so I know what the schedule's like. If you want to listen to the tech station, Leo Laporte will be on at 11, so-and-so will be on at 9, Computers 2K Now will be on at 9 in the morning on Sunday. So they have to build a schedule in order for it to kind of succeed. So rather than you're going through 1,000 podcasts to find what you want, I think that's the disconnect right now, that you still have to do work even when you're in the car to listen to internet radio.
And that's exactly right. I mean, when it comes to a one-button solution, that's when I think the game's changing. Clear Channel knows that the shift is coming, and I can prove it. You ever heard of iHeartRadio?
Sure.
What do you think that is?
It's a Clear Channel up.
It's a stake in the ground. They're setting themselves up for when the transition occurs.
Now, we've described this as the Wild West with internet broadcasting, and the next thing I want to go into after this is the do's and don'ts of any podcaster, internet broadcaster. What can we do to improve our audio? What do we do that's wrong? I know a lot of people make the same mistakes over and over again, so we're going to go through that because Mike has helped many, many people on the internet with their broadcasts. Because of him, I got 4 DBX 286 mic compressors, and it's night and day. I mean, I don't know why I didn't get this long ago. If I had known, I would have gotten this years ago. I mean, I'll give you an example right now. If I just hit the bypass button, I don't know if you guys could hear the difference. Mike, I'm sure you can, but it's totally flat. You hear the fans in the room. Now you don't. I mean, it's such a big difference. So we're going to go through, equipment-wise, what Mike suggests. Again, you could follow Mike on Twitter, MC Phillips. He also does a great radio program, internet radio program, Computers 2K Now, every Sunday morning. It goes on. There's no set end time, right, Mike?
That's right. We usually run out about 12:30 or 1 o'clock.
Yeah, there was the show that I called in. It was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and you guys had gone on at 9. So you guys go on forever, which is great. But this is an issue that I see happening. Now, right now it's the Wild West, and there's so many people doing great shows, so many people doing awful shows. And we have seen the shift where mainstream people are starting to come over to internet broadcasting. Adam Carolla, Kevin Smith, Joe Rogan, these are guys, not necessarily Joe. I don't think Joe's a radio guy. I don't think Kevin's a radio guy. Adam's a radio guy, and he's made the conversion to internet only. To me, this is something that many of, the amateur guys like me that are just starting to go online, when these celebrities start coming over, we're starting to get worried that, this is going to take my time slot. This is going to take my spot. They're going to get all the exposure on these services. Should we see it in that sense, or should we see it as, wow, look, mainstream is coming over. This is going to be great because more and more people are going to go online for content?
Well, I don't think that question's answered yet, Andrew. And again, it's like everything in life, it seems to be overly complicated because with these radio and Spencer and Chad, I think he would totally agree with this. I hope so. That there are a lot of ex-radio guys who just all of a sudden they go sign up for Mixler, they go sign up for Ustream. All of a sudden they go on the internet with their radio show and they think they're going to be a star. That's so far from the truth. You have to work your butt off to drive people to your stream. And this is the other part that uh, I think is so critical. Once you get them to your stream, you'd better do something good, because if you don't, they're going to be out of there in a heartbeat. They're going to just click in and click out. So
Oh,
there are two
100%.
things:
Yeah.
you got to get them there, you got to keep them there, right?
Yeah.
Now, having said that, some of these guys moving to the internet are very, very good. They're very, they have great voices. They understand audio. They can even get a webcam going on the video. They're picking up VidBlaster or Wirecast. So are they a potential threat? They can be, but I don't know what it is about the radio people. But when they transition, they're just, they think they're talking on the radio when they don't realize they're talking on the
And
internet.
it's totally different.
And I think, and I'm sitting here thinking this, trying to think what I'm going to say next to give you hopefully a decent answer to your question. But I think I just discovered what one of the big differences may be. And it's not a big transition, but it's a big difference in my opinion. One of the major assets of internet broadcasting is the standard or the quasi model of having chat going at the same time as your stream. And that is that if you want to call in to Rush Limbaugh's show, you might try 2 years before he'll answer your take your call, and then he might let you talk for 30 seconds. Larry King was even worse. You got to say one sentence, and then they disconnected you immediately.
Yeah, and people don't
But now-
realize that, you know, a lot of these stations only have 6 lines.
Oh, Rush Limbaugh only has 4.
Rush has 4. I mean, and that shows you. I mean, it's the #1 radio show in the country, one of the top shows. And he only has 4 lines, and millions of people, let's say hundreds of thousands of people are trying to call in weekly. You're right. It might take you 2 years to get through.
So here right now, I mean, you're not taking live calls on this show. We take live calls on to Computers 2K now, and people can call in and talk about computers. We can talk about iPhones. One of the most interesting discussions we ever had was on SIP connections, SIP clients, which is not something that I'm particularly that familiar with, but I know a little bit about it. So the interactivity, I think, is where the internet broadcasting trumps at this moment terrestrial radio. Now, can terrestrial radio change? Yes, but they typically, at least in the minds of the broadcasters, the radio stations have to appeal to a much broader audience than an internet broadcast has to appeal to a niche audience.
Yeah. No, you're right. And many of them do well. I mean, that's I'm just, and here's an example of, you know, what it's like. I was one of the first live talk, I guess, radio streams on Stitcher Radio. I was on, you know, the feed has been on 24 hours a day, and we were the only station. We were, you know, one of the top rated stations. Kevin Smith launched his network, his talk radio network, and he took the #1 slot. He took the #1 and 2 slot. My numbers, even though now I'm number 3 or 4 on the list, my numbers have quadrupled because Kevin Smith has brought so many people to that service, and now they're going over and they're listening to my program. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to have these big names coming on your service and kind of taking, you know, if it's your turf, coming into your turf.
Right. Well, you won't appreciate this because you're not old enough, but back in the 60s and 70s, in small market North Carolina, we had to listen to out-of-town radio stations because the AM radio stations signed off at night. Probably most of the radio stations were what we called daytimers, daytime-only stations that was wind down at sundown. So at night, we were and did listen to WLS in Chicago, WCFL in Chicago, WABC in New York. I mean, these big powerhouse stations would boom into our small towns at night. So about in the mid-'70s, as FM started decimating AM, WLS in Chicago, which was my favorite radio station of all time, was the only, they and WCFL were the only 2 music stations on AM in Chicago. And about this time, WCFL announced that it was going to switch formats and it was going to go talk or baseball, or I don't know what they were going to do. Well, by chance, I happened to be in the same place with John Guerin, who was program director of WLS in Chicago. He and I were in the same room, which was Pam's of Dallas, a jingle company. That's an entire different story there. But I said, John, how do you feel about WCFL going, no longer becoming a top 40 competitor? being the brilliant guy he is, he said, I don't like it at all. I said, why? You're getting rid of your competition. He said, no. He said, before they switched, there were two reasons for people to listen to AM. He said, now there's one.
Now there's one, yeah. Exactly, and that kind of proves the point. You kind of want more people doing this, so more people are tuning in and they're listening to what you're doing. I mean, that's really the truth. So, Mike, I want to go into this. We have a couple minutes left. We have 15, 20 minutes left. And I do want to talk about do's and don'ts of internet broadcasting. People that are just getting started or people that have been doing this for a couple of years. We always joke, and it's a known thing with you. People come to you and say, well, audio's not important. And that's a spin on the fact that nobody really cares about audio. Well, not nobody, but a lot of people don't care about audio, and they're so worried about the way that the video's looking and the camera and the angle of the camera, they're forgetting the most important thing. People have to hear you, and you have to sound clear.
Yes.
From what you've seen, what is the biggest mistake that people make when it comes to audio? Online, with internet broadcasting.
Well, they don't listen to it. Part of the problem is that, I mean this in the kindest sense. I mean, you've known me for a while now, and you know that I can BS like the best of them. But when it comes to audio, I take it seriously, and I will do anything I can to help anyone as long as they appreciate it. So what I think the big problem is, and I mean this kindly, is most people don't understand audio. If you don't believe it, listen to the people who call in using their microphone built into their computer. If I had my way about it, those would be removed from all computers. They are absolutely the worst possible way to communicate online that I'm aware of. If you even go get a blue snowball, or my favorite mic, the ATR 2100 USB, plug it in as a USB microphone, but get something where you can get the microphone closer to your mouth and people don't have to listen to the entire room. So all that being said, I think the biggest problem is that people, they don't understand audio, but then whenever they're doing their show, they don't bother to listen to it. I had a situation, I can't remember where it was.
Now, let me ask you, Mike, by listening to it, you mean listening to it as they're doing it or listening to it after they record?
Both.
But see, I know many people, and you're absolutely right, I know many people that do a show, and they're not monitoring in their headphones what they're saying. And that's how you learn to read the levels. That's how you learn where your settings should be. So I think it's a big mistake if you're not monitoring what you're doing.
And you have to care about it, and you have to, but you also have to train your ears. And I mean, I've got some really good friends who call me and they say, "What does it sound like? What does it sound like?" Well, how about this? How about that? And they really can't hear the difference. I mean, even Amnon, of all people, love him to death. And Amnon will call me and say, well, how does this sound? And I'll tell him, okay, tweak this, do that. And he'll say, well, I don't have any clue what it sounds like, but Mike says it sounds great, so we're going to leave it where it is. I mean, that's a fair comment. I mean, that's just not his thing. Amnon's a computer guy, and he can run rings around me on video. I'm just not that interested in video. We all have our areas of expertise. My years, I've been trained. What is the old rule that if you want to be an expert at something, you need to do it for at least 10,000 hours?
10,000 hours, yeah.
I bet I've got 30 or 40,000. I don't know how many years that is, but I mean, you can't be around it any more than I've been around it my whole life.
I think they say something like 7 years.
I don't know, but I mean, I've been around it forever. And after a while, you just develop a second nature. Now, the part of it that I haven't told you is that I've also done quite a bit in the recording industry. I've actually mixed some records, not big hits, some regional things that we've done. My brother and I have a recording studio. I've been in recording studio. I've done a recording session in Abbey Road Studio 2 in London, where the Beatles recorded all of their songs. Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sick when it comes to this stuff. So I've also trained my ears, probably more so than anybody just in the radio business would do, because I've had to learn how to do things, to make the records, to make the voiceover stuff. I've produced and engineered some voice only sessions for radio commercials for a guy now. He's passed away in 2001, but we did all of the songs. He was doing agency quality radio commercials, part of his way of making a living. They were all recorded right here in my room here.
Yeah.
Using a Synthesizer MKH416 and a Great River mic preamp into a Card Deluxe digital to analog to digital converter. But anyway, that's just detail. but and the stuff sounded it sounded great, like it was recorded in a studio up in New York City because I was
Yeah.
using the same equipment.
Yeah. I mean, the equipment goes a long way. Do you feel that that's a mistake that a lot of internet broadcasters do, where they're not really getting the equipment that they need, or they're getting equipment that is not necessarily exactly for what they are looking to do?
Well, I think in many cases, I think people overspend. Um, and I mean, I hate stepping on toes, but the Heil PR40 is a fabulous microphone. It is. I mean, it's the one that Leo Laporte uses. He has 100 of them, I guess. They're very popular microphones. Lots of people like them and use them. Steven has one. His works great. It's a fantastic microphone. But the reality is, I don't think most podcasters need to spend $325 to buy one. I've got a couple of them. I'm talking into one right now, but that's only to make Joe mad. But the reason that I don't think you need it is because you can take, in the microphone that I advocate now, I'm sort of shifting a tiny bit. I like the Audio Technica AT2005 USB. It's AT2005 USB, which is the same microphone as my favorite, which is the Audio Technica ATR2100-USB. The ATR2100 is about $20 cheaper. The benefit of the 2005 is that it has an enhanced windscreen and it's solid black, which looks better on camera. So $20, if you want to spend an extra $20 to get the better windscreen and the solid black color, I recommend the 2005.
And this is the dual. It's USB and XLR.
It is
Yeah.
USB and XLR, and you can even use the USB output and the XLR output at the same time. Somebody says, well, why would you want to do that? Well, think about it. Let's suppose that you're using the XLR output to go into a mixer like I am now, but then you take that USB output and go into your second computer. So if you want to do Skyping on the second computer while you're doing something otherwise on the first computer, you can use that same microphone to feed both computers at the same time.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Do it all the
That's very
time.
cool. Yeah. Yeah. Very, very, very interesting.
One of the real benefits, though, of the dual outputs is that, let's suppose that you're just getting started. You want to not buy a bunch of equipment. You get the ATR 2100 or AT 2005. You connect it by USB into your computer. You have to do probably a lot more post editing to get what you want. You have to add the input music, the output, the outro, whatever you're going to do to it. And so you really only need to record directly to the computer, not using Skype, not using second microphones. You're good to go for $59 or $80, whatever you spend on the microphone. You're going to get excellent quality broadcast audio.
Yeah.
Now, let's suppose then that you say, well, okay, yeah, and I want to do what Andrew's doing. I want to bring in 2 or 3 more people in the room and have a round table. Fine. Buy 2 or 3 more of them, get a mixer, and you can now connect them XLR into your mixer, and you don't have to throw away your microphones to go to the mixer-based solution like you would with a Blue Snowball or a Yeti or some of those USB-only microphones.
And these are dynamic mics, right?
The 2100 and the 2005 are dynamic microphones. Now, I'm not going real deep into this because it sort of is amusing and sort of disgusting, but I do believe a dynamic microphone is, for most people, the best solution for podcasting or internet broadcasting.
So here is the interesting thing with this.
Yes.
I use condenser mics.
Yes.
And when I tell people that I use a condenser mic, they look at me like I told them, I'm going to run you over with my car. They're extremely surprised that I use condensers. I don't use dynamic mics. And they always turn to me. They say, well, why does it sound like this? Why doesn't it sound, loud and there isn't too much room noise? And I tell them, well, it has to do with the way that you adjust the board. But now that I have the compressors and the preamps, it really cuts out all the noise. So I'm still on the fence with this. I don't necessarily think that dynamic is the only way to go with what we're doing.
No, it's not. But understand that in the recording industry, the premium mics are condenser microphones. And
Yeah,
in
they
the
are.
broadcasting industry, the EVRE20 is the most ubiquitous microphone in the radio industry. So, using those two comparisons, condenser mics are for recording studios, dynamic mics are for radio stations. Now, that's an overly gross simplification because almost every guitar part you ever hear recorded in a recording studio is probably a Shure SM57 on a guitar cabinet. And now they're diversifying. They're using other mics like a Royer 121 ribbons and other sorts of things. But I'm just telling you that throughout history, you would be stunned at how many guitars you've heard recorded through an SM57 dynamic microphone. So it's a horrible generalization. But the reality is that a microphone, a condenser microphone, is more sensitive than a dynamic
Much
microphone.
more, yeah, much more, and it
It
also varies from microphone to microphone, Mike. I mean, you've said that many times to people, depending on your voice, depending on your room, depending on how big the room is, how small the room is, what other equipment you have. Every microphone will sound different. So there's really, I don't ever feel that there's an answer like people that say, oh no, the PR40 is the one to go. The PR40 might work great for you, but it may not work that great for me.
I have a fellow who I'm not going to tell the whole story, but we were talking about the 320, the PR40 as to whether it would be the right mic for his voice. And when he and I talked and I listened to his voice, I very politely told him not to waste his money. And the reason why, you have to have a certain bass content in your voice for the PR40 to really work, the proximity effect to kick in and give you the lush sound that Leo likes and uses to his benefit. And this guy's voice was not deep enough that it was going to make any difference. Now, the reason I'm not being critical is because that very same requirement is true of the Sennheiser MKH416. It's $1,000 microphone.
Yeah.
That microphone is used by a lot of VO guys, voiceover guys out in LA, even though it wasn't designed for that purpose, because it has beautiful proximity effect if you know how to use it. It really enhances the bass in your voice. I could use one right now and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. My voice is average, but I don't have this great deep bass voice. And the MKH 416 would be a waste of money. I have one, but it would be a waste of money for me to go buy one so that it would give me a better sound. I've tested it. The PR40 complements my voice. The RE20 complements my voice. So that's why it's always important to pick the right microphone for your voice.
Yeah.
And it's not always going to be as simple as you think it is, but I will say this, and if anyone ever disagrees with me, bring it forward. I'm all anxious to hear it. I have yet to recommend an ATR 2100 or an AT2005. I've yet to recommend it to anyone who purchased it who was not blown away with the value for the money. It's
Yeah.
not a Heil PR40. It does not sound like a Heil PR40, although I will tell you that we happened to be watching Leo one day between shows when he unboxed and got an ATR 2100 that he ordered off of Amazon so he would have something for his iPad. And strangely enough, during his test, he unplugged his PR40, plugged in the ATR 2100, and his comment was, I really can't hear any difference.
Yeah, you'll be surprised. I mean, you don't have to spend the big bucks for a microphone, really. If you find the right mic and it works for you, it'll sound as good as just about any expensive mic that you'll try. It's really finding the right mic. It
And I
really
have
comes
no
down to it.
affiliate links, and I don't get any money for recommending it. It's just my recommendation. And I know that several guys in chat have them, and they're very pleased with them. So, I mean, at first, when I told these guys, I said, tell you what you do. You buy it, and if you don't like it, I'll give you your money back.
Has anybody asked for their money back?
No, no, they bought more.
So mic technique is another thing. Since we're on the microphone topic, many people don't have the proper mic technique. And either some people are, too far away and they crank everything up, or they're doing one of these and they're talking into the microphone.
Does that sound familiar?
It does. It sounds very familiar. It's 99% of the shows that I listen to.
Oh, okay.
Well,
what can I tell you?
What can you recommend? What's the proper mic technique?
Well, what a great question. It's too bad we don't have a lot of time. But the short answer is you got to learn what works. And that is that, and you see, I'm not using headphones or earbuds or anything right now because over time I've learned what the optimum distance is from the microphone. Is it perfect? No. Is my voice perfect? No, but it works great. But the bottom line is that when you're in the radio business, you have to wear headphones, and you do hear yourself coming back through those headphones. In the radio business, if you're in it very long and doing very much talking, then you will find that there is a certain sweet spot on the microphone, and you will find yourself gravitating towards that spot as long as you train your ears to listen for what's good and what's bad. So
Yeah.
it's almost like a servo controlled thing. You normally gravitate to the sweet spot, and different microphones have different sweet spots. One of the reasons that a lot of broadcasters like the RE20 is because it does not have a lot of proximity effects. So whether you're up close or a little far back, the sound is pretty consistent. The PR40 has good proximity effects. So you really have to find the sweet spot on that. If you get too close, it splats. If you're too far back, it sounds like you're on a computer mic.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, pretty much every mic has different technique, but you really shouldn't be eating the mic. I know a lot of people do that, especially with compressor mics. We've condenser mics because we've done that here. I've kind of conditioned everyone to be really close to the mic because I need to turn the gain down so you don't hear the room noise. But now I'm having to retrain everybody and tell them, no, listen, you can back off from the mic. We don't have that problem anymore. So it's interesting. Your top. What if someone were to come to you and say, what equipment should I buy to do my show? And you're going down a list of good equipment, not entry level, but something decent. What is the mic? What is the mixer? Do you go with a compressor? Because this is a question that a lot of podcasters want. Is it worth the money for a preamp compressor?
Well, they always say gate limiter compressor. Of course, to answer that question, we have to know more about what the real show is going to look like. Let's assume it's someone who's going to use the typical setup of maybe a couple of microphones. They're going to bring in one or two callers on Skype. Let's assume audio only. I'm not into video, Joe, and you have to do the video stuff. But you've got to have a mixer that has at least two auxiliary sends on it, and I feel very strongly that those auxiliary sends need to be post fader. If you don't know what that means, just remember it. And if you have two post fader auxiliary sends, that allows you to create a mix minus signal to send to your Skype computers, which allows your Skype callers to hear what you're broadcasting, but it doesn't feed their audio back to them. So it doesn't either A, create an echo, which Skype can cancel, or B, it doesn't cause Skype to have to work hard to try to cancel the audio coming back to it, sometimes with mixed results. So having said that, you can get, like you and I right now are using identically the same mixer, which is a Mackie, what is it?
1402 VLZ3.
Yeah. All right, and that's about the minimum. I mean, the Behringer makes a great line of mixers. The X1204 USB. I did not say 1204 USB. I said X1204 USB. It's unfortunate that the numbers are so confusing. The 1204 does not have but one post fader send. It has a pre-fader and a post fader. The X1204 has two post fader sends for the auxiliary. I think that's very important. You might be interested in knowing that I just now picked up a PreSonus Studio Live 16.4.2, which is the same mixer that Steven's using. It's the same mixer that Vance Willis and Mark Johnson are using on Studio Tech Live. I have never used a digital mixer where I've had time to sit down and play with it. I'm going to be doing an evaluation of that mixer and really calling out what the benefits are and the detriments are for a digital mixer for podcasters. I don't think the answers are going to be what some people want to hear, and I think they're going to be surprised at the others because I've already had some really interesting thoughts on it. So to get back to your question, what I would recommend is for a starter mixer, nothing smaller than a Behringer X1204 USB. Now, if you already know that you're going to be doing Skypezilla with 4 Skype computers and other things, no, that won't work. You need to start with a Behringer X2442. A lot of people don't like Behringer equipment.
I've stayed away from them, and I had one Behringer mixer when I first started, and it was awful. And I went to Yamaha, and I actually really liked the Yamaha mixer that I was using prior to the 1402, the Mackie. But in my opinion, this is if you're serious about this, I would go with the Mackie board. And this is my opinion. I don't know if Mike agrees with me. I think a a preamp, mic compressor with a gate limiter, it is extremely important to have. And the DBX is for the price and what you're getting, it's one of the best investments you can make in your audio, because not only can you do compression, you could, if you want to add more low and more high, you could do that.
Be careful with that.
Some people like it. Some people like to crank it all the way up. I don't. I just do a little tiny bit. But the thing that's worth it for this piece of equipment is the gate. You could shut off all the room noise, and it'll only pick you up, and it improves your audio quality. I mean, I can't even tell you. I mean, it's amazing.
All right, but let me address some things you just said, which I think are important, and that is that a gate does not eliminate the noise. People have a misconception. Yeah, I mean, I know you know this, but I don't think other people don't realize that a gate does not eliminate noise. All a gate does is that if it doesn't hear a certain amount of audio coming through the chain, such as your voice, it turns off that channel. So when you stop talking, the background noise disappears. That's important in a multiple microphone setup, because if you have background noise coming from 4 channels at the same time, they add up and your audio becomes very noisy.
Yeah.
So what the gate does is it does mask the noise. When you start talking, that background noise is still there. If you have an air conditioner running, when you start talking, you're going to hear that air conditioner if you listen carefully. But the ratio of your voice to the background noise is so high that the background noise is not as noticeable. The other thing that happens is people, and I know who they are, that I would not let Amnon go out and install a gate limiter compressor. Once he started broadcasting, well, you got to have, no, you don't get to have one of those. Why not? Because you need to learn how to run your equipment first. You need to learn to get your audio levels correct. You need to learn to match the audio callers coming in from Skype. You need to do it manually. And once you understand and control it manually, then we'll start adding the Band-Aids, because all a gate limiter compressor does is it's a Band-Aid to fix a problem. If you ran your board perfectly, had people who did perfect mic technique, who knew how to control their levels, not move back and talk and not get up too close, if you didn't have people who did those sorts of things, you would not need a gate, a limiter, or compressor, because all they are is Band-Aids to correct issues.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, also people talk about having EQ. I know of a self-absorbed podcasting, quote unquote, consultant, unquote, who has apparently has a PR40, and on his mixer, he cranks the bass up to 3 o'clock because it makes him sound more like Leo Laporte.
On his board or on his compressor?
On his board.
Okay, so what do I have mine? My low is at 1. So
1 is just a tiny bit, but 3 o'clock is a lot. And what happens is, and the only way I can get, because people don't want to listen. In the audio business, they used to call it boom and sizzle, which is really a pejorative term of saying you don't know what you're doing, because people can't listen to boom and sizzle for a long time because it fatigues your eardrums. I mean, it's terrible. And on sizzle, people don't know it or don't pay a lot of attention. But a lot of most women, their ability to hear high frequencies is dramatically greater than it is for guys. And guys are doing most of the broadcasting, so they crank up these high frequencies, and women are sitting there with their fingers in their ears.
What do you think? You should just keep it at, just flat, everything at 12 o'clock, and then you decide what you want from there?
Absolutely. I think that, and it's a qualified remark, but I think I tell people to keep your lows, mids, and highs at 12 o'clock. If it doesn't sound right at those settings, something's wrong with your equipment. You got the wrong microphone. You don't know how to use your microphone.
Yeah.
And I don't, boy, I'm trying to be really nice when I say this, and I don't think anyone's in chat that has done this, but I from time to time will run into people who will talk into the side of an end address microphone. I mean, if you, like, for example, here's the ubiquitous RE20 microphone. You've seen them forever if you've ever seen people on the radio. This is what's called an end address microphone. You talk in right here. This is the way you talk into this microphone. But you also have these sound openings on the side. So you might be looking at like most condenser microphones are what are called side address. So you might be talking into it. If you talk into the side of this microphone, it's going to sound like garbage, because the pickup pattern is cardioid, which means it's in this direction. When you're talking into the side of it, that's called off-axis pickup, and the frequency response changes dramatically. For the most part, you start losing all high frequencies. I've had several people that I've seen, and they do it worse with condenser mics than they do with dynamic mics, but they'll be talking into the very end of a side address microphone. So when I get them to rotate it like this, I mean, it's just night and day. The other thing with a side
Why
address
would they
microphone,
talk into the side?
say again?
Why would they talk into the side?
They don't know better, Andrew. They've never done it before. They've never done it before.
I find that hysterical.
Well, I mean, it would be hysterical, but I mean, you don't blame people for what they don't know, and
Yeah.
particularly when they're trying to learn. That's why I try to help people so much. And I'm not judgmental. I mean, I think it's funny that they don't know which end to talk into the microphone, but I don't think they're stupid for not knowing. They just haven't learned it yet. They're in the process of familiarizing themselves with this equipment. I've got 30, 40,000 hours in learning how to use a lot of this equipment. And I can name you some people who can make me look like I don't even know how to turn on a light switch.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pros, especially with audio. When people distribute their podcasts, I know a lot of people have made two big mistakes. One, that they use a very low format for the audio, or two, they use a very large format for the audio. What is the perfect bit rate for a audio podcast? Should it be 64? Should it be 96? 128?
Well, this is just my opinion, and most people will disagree, or many people will disagree. But I think if you're going to do your podcast in stereo, which the only reason I can think of doing a podcast in stereo is if you have your theme music and you want to have that in stereo, which that's okay if you want to do that, then that should be 128K MP3. I just don't see it needing to be any higher than that. If you're going to do mono voice only, I think you can get away with 64K. I don't have any problem with 64K. That being said, if you want to do 80K, 96K, if you got the bandwidth, it's not going to hurt anything. But 128K mono, in my opinion, is way overkill. I don't think 99% of the people listening either A, can hear the difference, or B, really care. If you're doing it in 32K, I won't even listen to it.
We do 96K. We just upped ours from 64 to 96, and I mean, I could tell a difference. Most people
Mono
can't.
or stereo?
A stereo.
Yeah. Well,
I do 96K
I would argue
stereo.
that absolutely 64K stereo, in my opinion, is on the verge of non-listenable.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah.
But
Why
but
do people do
96K
stereo?
is very acceptable.
Why do people do stereo instead of mono? The reason why we've stuck with stereo is because this is what we started doing, and we never changed it over. But I do agree that there's really no point in doing stereo for a podcast.
Except that supposedly some of the web players are having trouble with the mono format.
Really?
Yeah.
What is it doing?
I can't remember which ones, but apparently, when I say some of the suppliers, I'm talking like the Libsyns, the Blueberries, some of them, and I don't remember which one it is, but one of them out there really doesn't like MP3 mono files for some reason, and it's the problem of the CDN, not the problem of the file. Maybe that's even corrected by now, but my attitude would be to, if you want to do it in mono, do it in mono, and if you have a problem, fix the problem.
So pretty much,
people do it in stereo. I think that because if you set up an encoder to record your show, chances are the default settings are for stereo anyway.
Yeah. So pretty much everything is set to stereo. So you're ending up doing stereo, and that's what happened with us.
Bandwidth is cheap now.
Yeah.
I don't see any reason not to do it in stereo, particularly if you have any your theme music, a show opens, things of that nature, or even if you do excerpts, play videos that people send you, there can be stereo in those videos. And I'm a stereo fanatic. I mean, I am. Curtis Carpenter is a great friend of mine, and Curtis and I have spent unbelievable amount of time and money trying to find stereo versions of songs that were recorded and released back in the 60s and even the 70s. I mean, Curtis is sick compared to me because I can name a song and he'll tell you which version of the song was released and whether it was wide stereo, simulated stereo, or whether it was recorded from the tapes, master tapes, or whether it was remastered with enhancing equipment. I mean, he's sick when it comes to this stuff. But I have stereo versions of songs that were not even meant to be released in stereo. So I love stereo is what I was getting to.
No, listen. I think whatever sounds good, that's what you should do in the end. If it sounds good and it's working for you, I think you should stick to it. I think a lot of people are doing a lot of different things, and what I necessarily do in my setup, it might not be what you should be doing in yours, because we all have different environments that we broadcast out of. But
And Steven's asking whether Ustream Justin only bring in mono audio, and I think if you use their built-in tools, they may be mono only. But if you use FMLE to stream, you can stream in stereo.
And that says it. Mike, thank you so much. I
pleasure.
really appreciate this, because and we're gonna have you back again, because there's so much to talk to you about. With the IAIB, you're a big player on the forum, and you help out a lot of people, and that's greatly appreciated. I want to let everybody know, if you're watching this and you're not an IAIB member and you're an internet broadcaster, you can go to ibroadcastnetwork.org, ibroadcastnetwork.org, and you can sign up there. The International Association of Internet Broadcasters is the centralized hub for all things internet broadcasting. We also have an unbelievable forum, a lot of great people on there, a lot of people that know what they're talking about, Mike being one of them. And go sign up, get your invite key by going to the front page and signing up. We're going to have this posted on the website within a day or two. Probably by tomorrow we'll have it up at ibroadcastnetwork.org. Also, it'll be on our website, gfknetwork.com. You can follow Mike on Twitter, MC Phillips. He also has a website, mikephillips.me. That's mikephillips.me. Computers 2K Now is on Sundays at 9 a.m. Pacific, and it goes on 9 a.m. Eastern, and it goes on for a couple hours. So there's no end time. It's forever. The show goes on.
Might still be
hours.
going on. I'm not sure.
I think it is actually. We're actually we have to stop because we have to go listen to the show.
And by the way, Andrew,
yes.
where the audio help is extremely expensive and prohibitive in cost. Actually, it's free.
Yes, it is. It's always free from you. There's no charge. There's no membership to you. IAIB too. There's no membership, nothing. Everything is free for the IAIB.
No reason not to go there today and do it.
Exactly. Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much for coming on. And we'll see you all next week on IAIB Spotlight.